All right, well, I get to poo-poo on the parade.
Yes, this is your opportunity to tell us that all reboots are bad, all remakes are bad, and you didn't enjoy this one at all.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanties Screen Scouts.
Have you heard of this thing called the law of quantum entanglement?
No, I haven't.
Neither have I.
Okay, well then we're off to a great start then, I guess. Anyway, I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
And today we're joined once again by Marshall Ryan Maresca, if I could say your name, for Lord, I'm having word problems. This time for discussion of the new Quantum Leap show, developed by Stephen Lillian and Brian Winbrandt and starring Raymond Lee, Caitlin Bassett, Mason Alexander Park, Nunrisa Lee, and Ernie Hudson? Exciting? I love Ernie Hudson. Like, he can be my dad. That's fine. Welcome to the show, Marshall.
Hello. It's me, Marshall Ryan Maresca, and I'm excited to be here. Last time I was here, this was just like a rumor. It wasn't quite a rumor, but it was just in the, we've cast some people, and who knows what this show is going to be phase. Mm-hmm. So now we've seen a whole season.
Yeah, when we spoke about it, it hadn't had a trailer, only cast 2 characters, none of which was Ernie Hudson, who you'd imagine would have been a slam dunk given the script in the first place. And no one else could confirm it except for like 2 sites, and now I'm very excited to know that it exists and we can talk about it. But before we actually do talk about the thing, a friendly reminder that we want to hear from you in the audience. So, if you're listening to this right now, please feel free to share your comments with us about this and past episodes at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. We have done a couple of listener mailbag episodes and like them a lot. So please share your thoughts, questions, topic suggestions, and more, including about stuff that we do for Screen Scouts. We'd like to hear what you think about shows that we have watched, if you watch them and enjoy them, if you had thoughts that we didn't express in this podcast. We'd like to hear those things so we can include those as well. So please, get your thoughts in. skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions.
Awesome. Okay, so we're here to talk about a little show called Quantum Leap, which has come back, rebooteried,
launched.
Lived.
Is it a reboot if it exists in the exact same universe as the original?
Well, I mean, that doesn't necessarily, but, but, I mean, I think it's literally using those same rules that they use in Scream 5, which was also just called Scream, of the reboot quel, which is, both a new thing with new characters, but remains respectful of the legacy while doing that, and uses the legacy characters in interesting ways while still telling its new story with its new characters. So, I mean, that is, I think, pretty much what it's doing here.
Yeah, because I do think like a fundamental part of the world building is nothing has changed between the original Quantum Leap program and now. We're just watching a new group of people react to the consequences of the first program.
Nothing has changed in the sense that a show that is literally about changing history.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Plenty of things are changing all the time, including the fact that they are living in a changed history because of the things that Sam Beckett did when he was time traveling.
Yeah.
It is textually explicit.
It is very interesting because it is one of a handful of times when we have had the reboot thing and it has decided to be a continuation, albeit with different characters. Although in this case, it's one that there's lots of rumors circulating right now about, like, what's season 2 going to be? Are they going to bring Sam Beckett back? Are they going to find him? All of these kinds of questions, because Scott Bakula is still alive and sexy as hell. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he would say no if he were offered a reasonable contract to come back, because they have set it up as entirely possible that they could do this, which is interesting, because usually when we do reboots of any kind where we take an old thing, they just like Hawaii Five-0 is not a continuation. They just did their own version of Hawaii Five-0.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, I think Magnum PI is kind of the same. When they did MacGyver, I think it was essentially the same thing. So it doesn't happen terribly often that we get this, which I think is really interesting. And I have thoughts and concerns, but also some interesting things to say about specific episodes here. I will just say that I am continuously still mad that airline travel sucks so much today, because despite having a hijacking on a plane, the service on that plane is still better than service today on modern airlines. And that's saying something, because it came with a hijacking and 2 people being poisoned by cyanide.
And yet still seemed like a cooler flight. I do kind of love like one thing of like near time travel that seemed to be a consistent thing is showing that flying really was actually cooler back in the 70s and 80s. I remember, if you remember that short-lived show Journeyman, which was a similar kind of show in terms of like, here's a guy traveling in time to fix a thing in the past and change the past for the better. It also had he just shows up on a plane in the past, and again, it's a cooler plane because it's the 70s, and it's just, it makes it seem like flying is a party. Though it probably, that is somewhat of a rose-colored glasses, but still, I do love that, like, wow, look how much space they have. They have
Right?
a second floor. They have a lounge.
I guess the downside is way more sexism. Because
That's true.
it is like really, whew, boy, it is. I'm very glad that episode did not have like the extra gross of like having a man like spank a flight attendant on the butt, because they could have done that and it would have been period relevant. But they decided, you know what? We'll just have the guy high on Quaaludes, and that'll be our weirdest moment for the episode.
Yeah, just has Quaaludes out and about, because 70s. We're probably getting ahead of ourselves because we're talking about the penultimate episode rather than...
Right. Fair point. Okay, so let's start with some general reactions, because this is a new show following in the footsteps of the old show, and with that comes, frankly, the potential for a show not to work out. So what are some general overall thoughts you have about how this first season, they will have a second, that has already been confirmed, how this first season went in your mind? And we'll start with you, Marsha, because you're the guest and you're also the Quantum Leap expert.
Okay. Well, personally, I really dug this. I was just so happy to like get this kind of content back. It did feel at its like emotional core to be coming from the same place as the original. And so for me, that was definitely very satisfying. I loved Ben Song as a character. I think, he's a great character to put in the center. Especially, I love that they explicitly made him be a pacifist. And while in the original series, Sam was not like a violent gung-ho guy, but he was more than willing to say, punch somebody out if the situation called for it. And they did do some explicit episodes that were about, maybe over the course of time, Sam is going to have to kill somebody to fix things. And so they did an episode that's very specifically about Sam being willing to do that. And they did something similar here by putting Ben in a similar situation, but still Ben maintains his core values. And so, but I thought Ben was a great character. I thought, he just was a great person to put into the center of this and be the person solving these problems. And Raymond Lee, just fabulous to watch. Everyone in the cast, fabulous. On the whole, I enjoyed it a lot.
Brandon, what about you?
I have probably said several times on social media during this run of season 1 that I enjoyed this more than the original. There are things about this season that stand out to me as deliberate attempts to respond to what I guess in my head are assumptions about what it would mean to make Quantum Leap in the present day in ways that I think are really engaging. One of which very obviously is Ben Song as interesting a protagonist as Sam Beckett? And I would say yes, in ways that are obviously very contradictory to Sam. Sam is, on a regular basis, a touch more proactive than Ben would be. Being Scott Bakula at that point in time, Sam Beckett is almost preternaturally charismatic. And the things that I think that are interesting about using Ben as our point of view character here instead is we get to see what it would look like if somebody who didn't have any of those things were leaping. He doesn't have the same kind of charisma as Beckett does. As the youths would say, he has no riz. And I think that that's actually really cool, in part because we're getting to see someone who actually has to learn what a social situation requires and adapt to it in real time. And that's even more interesting because if a thing that we didn't really pay any obvious note to previously is that when we were watching season 1, Sam Beckett has never, in season 1, leapt into a woman. And in the entirety of the series will only do so a couple of times, and it will be a joke in the series. But Ben does that several times here, where it is not remarkably of note, and part of what is supposed to keep him emotionally off guard in those circumstances is, I do not know what a woman would do in these situations, because I've never had to make these decisions from the point of view of a woman. The very first time that he leaps into a woman in season 1, he has an uncomfortable interaction at a bar, and is struggling with the fact that this is supposed to be if I say to a man, please leave me alone, he's supposed to leave me alone, right? Oh wait, I'm a woman. That's not how that works. And I think that playing with those things is actually kind of interesting in this lens, as we'll learn more deeply in some particular episodes as well.
I absolutely agree with you on that. What I think is most fascinating, like you said, in the original, Sam leapt into a woman maybe 7 or 8 times, and almost every single one of them, him being a woman was so textually explicit to what the story was about, being about sexism in the office, being about motherhood, being about pregnancy, being about women's liberation. And it was like, well, we have to make him a woman for this story because there's no way for him to be in this story other than as a woman. And here Ben leapt into a woman, I want to say about a third of the time, maybe even more. And I didn't bother doing the math, but most of those stories, there wasn't an explicitly, this is a female story he's in. He didn't, almost any one of those stories, the person he leapt into could have been a man, and it wouldn't really have, affected necessarily the plot of the story. It affects the way he interacts with the other characters, but, he could have been the son who worked in the Indian restaurant. He could have been a young man who was the assistant DA, and it wouldn't have affected the plot of the story necessarily. Those plots did not depend on him being a woman. And I think all of that gave so many of the leaps more interesting dynamics. So often in the original series, Sam is not a straight white man in only a handful of episodes, and all of them he is explicitly not a straight white man for explicit plot dependent reasons. It is that kind of trope of this is different from being normal for a reason.
That you can only empathize with marginalized experiences if you are literally walking in their shoes.
Right. And here, it is a far wider range. First of all, Ben Song is not a white man, but it is a far wider range of the kinds of people he's leaping into and the kinds of experiences he's having by being all sorts of different races and genders. And thus his sum total of experience in only 17 leaps is a lot more human than Sam's were over the course of the whole series.
Interesting. All right, well, I get to poo-poo on the parade.
Yes, this is your opportunity to tell us all reboots are bad, all remakes are bad, and you didn't enjoy this one at all.
No, well, yes and no. I don't think overall this season is bad. I don't want to suggest that. I will just say that if not for the fact that I had to watch this entire season for this podcast, if I had just seen the first episode of the show, I would have quit immediately. Because nothing in the first episode for me made me go, this is something different. It just felt like it's just more of the same. Everything about the frame of the first episode is essentially the same frame as the previous one. Guy goes into thing before it's ready to go, and everybody's like, what the fuck, dude? And then he ends up losing his memory and goes through the same thing. It's basically the same thing. And I was like, why is this the place that you started? Like, I get it, because later on we get some of the mystery about what's going on, but I think if I had just seen that, I would have just tapped out. Because of my resistance to just endlessly fucking rebooting and remaking and redoing and recontinuing everything under the sun. I'm utterly exhausted with it. And it's unfortunate because I really like Quantum Leap, and Quantum Leap actually has a lot of meaning to me because of my family, blah, blah, blah. That said, once I kind of went through a few more episodes, like, yeah, the show, I think, at its heart is really quite good. It has a lot of really fun moments. I thought the Western episode was silly, but still quite a lot of fun to watch. There are a couple of episodes where they do really interesting things with the social messaging, which the show has always kind of been social messagey. There are a handful of episodes where I just feel like I have never... there are very few times in my life when I'm like, wow, you really wanted to hammer the message home, and you hit it way too hard. Like, you took me and you hit me, and then you just kept hitting me with a mallet until I had no brain left.
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
Yep. And yeah, we'll probably come back to it. But that said, overall, there are a lot of really fun episodes. There are a lot of really cool ideas. I like when they're on the warship and dealing with that whole problem. There's a lot of really cool stuff that's going on. And I think by about the midpoint, when I started to kind of figure out what the mystery was, I was like, okay, now I'm kind of invested in this mystery. Like, what is going on here? They're like breaking rules, and like weird stuff's happening, and there's a conspiracy, and like there's like fucking evil leapers again, and like, what is happening? That was cool. I thought that was great. I hope season 2 is stronger. I'll give it a shot. But if they give me another episode where the numbers 669 appear above a door, and then when the door closes, the 9 flips over and turns it. If they give me another one of those, I'm going to lose my mind. That's some shit I expect from cartoons for kids. Stop doing it in stuff meant for a general audience. I'm gonna send a fucking letter to them.
I thought that was cute,
this.
though. I appreciated
write to the
that.
manager about this one.
I appreciated that for how silly it was.
It's so dumb, though. Like, it's the same joke they've been making for 50 years. Like, come on, guys, stop. You can't make this joke again. It's not cute. It's just the same joke.
I will agree with you. The pilot is very piloty. Like, it's extremely piloty. And I mean, what is fascinating, while they do, connect to all the history of the thing, they, like, especially in the pilot, they mention Sam Beckett a lot. And I think at least part of that is just be like, remember that show you liked in the 90s? Well, we're doing it again, and making sure the audience knows, yes, we are still in this, this history with being part of Sam Beckett and Al Galavici. But at the same time, it's very piloty, and there are aspects of that which I think are kind of off-putting, and also I think in the first few episodes they hadn't quite nailed the balance of Ben on the Leap and the folks back at Project Quantum Leap dealing with whatever's also happening, including running the leap. Like, they hadn't quite nailed that, and it took about 4 or 5 episodes to get the balance right, and then it tended to work. But certainly in the early episodes, there was a little too much folks back at the project just being stupid. And I did have some of them where sometimes it was like the people who were at the project, you had, Magic and Ian and Jen, like, being a little too dumb for people who work on a time travel project. Be a little too dumb about what that might mean. It's like, wait a second. A different time traveler from ahead of us in time. How can that work? It's like,
right.
No, that's like, come on, guys, come on. Be at least at 201.
I will make 2 concessions knowing that this is network television. This is not me saying that this is This is not me saying that these are perfect decisions. This is me saying that they're network decisions. The first of which is the pilot kinda has to be the Member Berries episode because it's trying to alleviate the fears of other Sean Dukes in the room. It's why there is a memoriam to Dean Stockwell at the end of the episode. It's why for 4 episodes everyone keeps talking about the program as if its fundamental goal is to find Sam and bring him back, and then they stop talking about him immediately afterward. It's why Janice is here. Not only on a world building level, because it kind of reinforces the idea that this program has continuously been a kind of black site program, specifically with the intent of trying to figure out what went wrong the first time and resolve it. Oops, it's going wrong again. Maybe this program is just kind of cursed. Was kind of entertaining to me. But also, like, I get the fundamental tension of how do you qualify some of these mysteries in particular for people who either don't care about a reboot or don't have time in a pilot to figure out whether they care about a time travel mystery, because a time travel mystery obviously requires information that is missing to only be revealed through time, and that means you're asking me to commit, and I'm only giving you this one episode. So I get why they kind of jumped the gun on, like, personally, one of the things that I wish that they hesitated on was Addison revealing to Ben that they were in a relationship. Because I wanted Ben to kind of struggle with, okay, you care a lot about why I am here. Is there something going on? Wait, I can't tell you. I thought that was gonna be really interesting, and then it just bang. It just happened. Cool, fine. But I get why, because I don't think they thought anybody would be committed that long. And the other thing is, sometimes you just kind of have to assume that when a thing is particularly puzzling, you need to be clear about it for your audience. I wish that they would stop doing that on network television, to be sure. But I could see why a writer thought it was valuable to make a security specialist at a top secret government program go, I don't know why we would not be aware that another leaper is active from another point in time. Like, it's all of time, Jen. What did you think would happen? But I get why they needed to be clear about that. Because the obvious audience question would be like, oh, so there's a mole in the program right now? No, that's not obvious. Maybe this person is just active from the future. That's how these things work. And I think that being obvious about the fact that those are the stakes means that they're trying to set up the audience to know this is exactly the puzzle that we're trying to present here. Don't ask us any more questions about anything other than this puzzle, which is kind of lazy on one end, but you don't want people to get lost on the other, and I wish that people would trust the audience to get lost a little bit more.
Well, I do know that the what I think it was like the 5th or 6th episode, the earthquake episode, was what they originally shot as the pilot. And then, like, I guess the network was like, we need you to hold our hand a little more. And so they just did a new pilot altogether, and then did reshoots and tweaks to the earthquake episode to make it work as being the 6th episode as opposed to the first. So I think that very thing of the pilot seeming very piloty is exactly what you're talking about. I think it's the network being like, we need you to hold our hand a little more to get us through the beginning. It is a very network TV sort of thing, which is why this is like the first network show I've watched live as it aired in a long time.
And the thing is, I would have really liked that episode to have been the pilot, because I really like the narrative setup of everyone at HQ now learning that Ben has illegally leapt on the day that Addison is supposed to leap. And then Ben is like, oops, I'm in an earthquake now. I've just learned that the loved one of the person whose body I'm presently inhabiting might be under rubble. Did I make the right decision? Maybe I shouldn't have done the thing. As opposed to the first episode, which is built specifically to be a kind of action episode. Like, its energy is to set Ben up for, you are on these leaps in part so you can learn things and learn to be more, and show yourself to be more capable in these situations. So let's put you in a caper. Let's just put you in a heist so you can get an opportunity to reveal yourself to be secretly cool, as opposed to an episode like What a Disaster where he would prove himself to be vulnerable more so than anything else, which I think would have been the better episode.
All right, so can we talk about the elephant in the room?
I'm
Which
curious
one?
what the elephant in the room is.
Yes.
Let's talk about what is probably the most reviled episode of this season, which is Let Them Play. It has the lowest rating of anything on IMDb.
How much of that is just terrible people
Good Lord.
downvoting?
I looked at it earlier because I was like, I can't be the only one having the feeling I'm having and still liking trans people at the end. And certainly some of the user reviews are just like your typical like culture war bullshit, like blah blah blah. But some of the critiques that are offered are critiques that are pretty similar to what I would say, which is just concerned with how the writing operates in this episode. And for me, the biggest problem I had with this episode is I did really feel like I was being hit with a mallet. And it wasn't just the story, like it's a story about like accepting trans kids and supporting them and trying to make a more inclusive, in this case, school community. It was dealing with trans athletes, etc. That, I mean, already is going to seem very politically charged by default because of the culture we're currently living in. And so I think that was fine and is kind of inevitable. Like, you can't talk about this issue like and be subtle, I don't think. But there's a moment in the episode that I just went, are you fucking kidding me? Which is when
I
one
know
of the
exactly
parents,
what the moment is.
Yes, it's the vote with the parents. The parents and the kids like meet up and they like do like a group session and the parents are talking. And one of the parents is like giving a full-on sermon about like accepting and supporting your kids. And as this is happening, we get these one-on-one shots of the kids standing in a separate
staring
area.
at the camera.
Right. In what seemed to me
which
is
like breaks the fourth wall and makes
completely.
it be like
It felt like a PSA.
Exactly.
Right. Which I don't have a problem with on its own, but in an episode that's meant to be a narrative exploration of the ethics and morality of this situation that we are literally living right now, it was like too much. It was so over the top, and I don't know what convinced them that this was the tactic to explore this, because there's no way they were going to get criticism no matter what by just touching this issue. Like, so you're going to deal with it. So like, whatever, just make a good story and who gives a shit what a bunch of culture war assholes think. And it made me annoyed because I was like, the actually more interesting thing you could have done with some of the time was maybe deal with the fact that actually the solution at the end of this is not reality and is much more complicated, because they just like basically like, oh, the kid plays basketball, and then like all of the anti-trans parents are like, yeah, go kids, and it's like, no, that's literally not what's happening. No, like, we need to deal with the reality of this situation. We can't just like use feelings to get through this. The reality is we're watching this get worse and worse and worse. Literally, like, as I was watching this episode, they just passed or are passing a bunch of laws to ban trans athletes. Like, they're just, you needed to spend more time really digging into the politics of this and then finding your moral answer to it, which is there. It's just, I just think the focus should have been on getting us to that without like the PSA in the center. But maybe I'm wrong.
It's preaching to the choir, and even, and I'm in the choir, and I'm just saying, like, aim it somewhere else and, stop hitting me with it, because I'm already here. And the people who aren't here, this isn't going to get them there. What I did like about the ending of that one was that the part that felt honest was that her fellow students were like, you know what? This is not a big deal to us. We want to, we don't want to, like, don't drag us into this and saying you're doing it for us, because you're not. Like, that's the part of it that I think worked best.
I agree 100%. That, to me, when the students were like, this situation's bullshit, we're going to resist it, I was like, no, that's literally what young people are doing right now. As they're looking at what adults are doing and they're saying, no, fuck that shit. We're going to do our own thing. And even if it costs us, because we're gonna fight for, in this case, this person who we love and is a part of the team, right? And I like the re-emphasis on, like, Gia's part of the team. Like, that's the whole point. Like, there is no team without Gia. We're all part of this together. And I was like, that's great, because solidarity is actually one of the things you could do. Anyway, Brandon, I'm sorry, I've rambled enough. I'll shut up.
I mean, maybe my opinion is colored by the fact that I am myself a marginalized person.
Perhaps,
but
yeah.
I feel a lot about this in the same ways that I felt about the complexities we had about that one episode in the first season of the original. I don't need to tell you which one.
Yeah.
Which is multifaceted. One, you are right in saying that people would find a thing to be upset about such an episode regardless. But I also believe, judging from the breadth of reaction that time has given that civil rights episode of the original, is that part of the duty of time travel television in the first place is for us to be at a remove from our own history, such that in the future, when the Overton window about our beliefs have shifted, we can get to the point where someone will look at this episode 30 years removed from its original airing and go, you know, that was fucked up that people used to behave that way. And we're not there yet, but we're not there yet because a lot of people haven't been bludgeoned over the head yet. And I think that bludgeoning them over the head is kind of the goal. On a framing level, that trans teenager standing in front of a halo-lit stained glass window in a church basement as their parents are talking about how much they deserve to be loved and respected wouldn't be weird if it came from prestige television. If that happened in 6 minutes of an episode of Shameless or some kind of stuff like that, people would be like, yeah, no, I get it. I get what you're going for on some level. This is supposed to be visually a lot because we're entering the frame of these people in this moment of valuing the person that they love in a way that is somewhat elevated from the way that they're seen in the real world. And this is not perfect, to be sure, but like, I think that the goal of the episode being this intense is deliberate. I feel like a lot of shows are similarly deliberate all the time. And I guess for me, why it works is in part because there are no ways that you can be subtle about those kinds of things without seemingly diluting those consequences. And also because if you wanted to be more obvious about those consequences, this episode would be an episode about losing Gia either way in the real world. Because that's what's going to happen in the real world. We could write that episode. I think that episode would have been just as touching. In that episode 1, Ben doesn't go back because Ben fails. And 2, in that episode, no one learns anything other than the fact that things suck. And I think that there are parts that I saw a lot of other people get really frustrated about in their own discussion about the episode that I like a lot. Perhaps the only thing that particularly bothers me in the episode, weirdly enough, is that they didn't give Gia enough times on the court to obviously be a team player. That final game has Gia scoring a lot of points, and I'm glad for Gia. Gia is obviously apparently the best player on the team, but I would have liked her to pass more. I would have liked that one girl who was a few more assists in the beginning
rather than winning shots.
because she was the character that I felt the most in this. Like, she was the most honest teenager in the show to me, because she's not a transphobe, in scare quotes that I'm expressing right now visually for my friends here, because her concern very obviously is, I want to make it in women's basketball and I don't want anybody to pass over me. And that makes me obviously feel a kind of way, because a part of me sees Gia as not the same as me, but she is my teammate and is going out of her way to express that to me, regardless of how much I'm being cruel to her face. And neither of us like my mother, who is just a shit in general. So maybe I need to figure out how we can find sisterhood, and we figure it out by me seeing my mother be a hit in the principal's office right next to you. And I thought that was really cool. And I wanted them to get more out of that as a result. And that's the only disappointment that I really had about the episode. But Sean, you're making pincers at me.
I am making pincers. Because I just want to note what the message at the end of this is, which is supposed to be about acceptance and inclusion, which the teenagers do. But the message of the adults who are against Gia playing is, as long as Gia's good, she's okay. Which is a really shit message, because your worth should not be how useful you happen to be to the mission of other people. It should just be based on your general worth as a human being. Which is ultimately what Gia's asking for, is just to be treated like a human being. But at the end, it's like, the mother is suddenly not transphobic anymore, and I'm like, but why? And the only answer is, because Gia's good, and they're gonna go to regionals. And that's a really fucked up message, let me just tell you. Like, anyway, Marshall, please.
Well, I was going to say, you want to hope that, like, somewhere off stage, that daughter, gave her mother a good talking to and slapped some sense into her. But, I mean, and part of it is because of the format of the show. Like, very little can happen that does not have Ben at the center. And so, because of just, like, if other people are just solving their own problems without Ben, then why is Ben there? And thus, what is the point of the show? But like, on the whole, I am more with Brandon that I did like this episode plenty. And if it wasn't for, I think my only big problem with it were those scenes of, like, staring at the camera, halo light behind them. Because if nothing else, it breaks the style of the show in a way that no other part of the show ever did. And so that's the part that I was like, guys, come on. That's a bit much.
I wish more primetime network television would break style for me, personally. I thought that was kind of neat. I kind of wish they dedicated that kind of energy to more cool stuff that was happening in the background of this universe of this show in general as well. But I can see why they used it specifically in this moment as well. But yeah.
I want to pivot a little more to universe of the show, because the show does some interesting things in terms of being explicitly within the same world as that Sam Beckett traveled in time. But also there are some very notable differences that, like, many people on the internet have been, like, sort of getting their hackles raised up about. But, like,
some of which they are obviously wrong about, by the way.
Some of which they're obviously wrong about. Like, some of them, like, are the ways that Ben's Project Quantum Leap, the technology, is explicitly different in a few ways than Sam's is. Like, Sam's, there is the issue is, like, is it his mind leaping? Is it his body leaping? We don't know. Like, is he in the body of this other person, or is he in his own body? And I mean, to be honest, if you went into the Quantum Leap writer's room in 1992 and asked all of 7 of them in the room, you would get 7 different answers because there was no agreement there. But here they make it explicit that Ben has the physical abilities and limitations of the person he has leaped into, and that it is their body. They make that very explicit. And they also don't have the waiting room, which was kind of a bigger deal in the original series, especially in the last season, where they had more and more scenes that involved Al talking to the person in the waiting room, I think just to give Dean Stockwell more to do. But here they just removed the waiting room as a concept altogether, and I know a lot of people sort of like were like meh about that. And I mean, I can understand why some people are upset, but at the same time, I also think, like, the way they express how this project was built was they literally had all of, like, Sam's notes and stuff, but still had to basically rebuild it from scratch. And so the fact that the technology went down a slightly different path is fine. Like, it doesn't strike me as, like, a continuity error, like that they made a mistake. But at the same time, I love the way we are very explicitly in that world, where we see Beth explicitly, and that Janice, Al's youngest daughter, is a key character. What else? In the second episode, the space shuttle episode, the pilot is Samantha Stratton, who, this probably didn't mean anything to either of you, but in the pilot episode of the original series, Sam leaps into the test pilot of the X-3 plane. And in doing so, he saves his wife, like, his wife goes into labor early and he saves her and saves the baby that she's having, who in the original history died. That baby is Samantha Stratton.
Well, and also Magic.
And then, of course, I was saving the big one, which is Magic, who is explicitly who Sam leaps into in the Vietnam episode. And they make that very explicitly text that by hearing his version of events, and then how that, knowing like something weird happened to me, and having him then, because of his military clearance, finding out about this project, being like, that's the weird thing that happened to me, and thus becoming obsessed with it and becoming a key part of it.
To the point where he can intuit when other people have had the experience based solely on the way that they describe it, which was very cool to me when he was listening to that obviously very weird and very not very good poetry that was taking place in that one episode.
Hey, that poetry was great. It's very
okay.
angsty,
Yes, I'm being
had
very
lots
mean.
Of feeling.
I'm being very mean. It
came from an honest place.
Yeah, it came from an honest place, which is true.
Yeah.
But like, I appreciate the fact that Magic is like, wait, what's happening? Oh, that's what's happening here. And he's the only one as a result that can put all of the information that has gotten him to that room into context simply by hearing this person describe an experience that they've had. And that was really rad to me, and I like that a lot. But I also wanted to touch very briefly to correct a thing that Marshall did say, which is, if you went into the original writer's room and asked everybody what was going on in Quantum Leap, by the time you got to Donald B. Belisario, he would tell you, exactly, don't examine this too closely.
Don't examine this too closely, yeah.
And the thing that I think I appreciate a lot more about this is, about the reboot, if we're calling it a reboot, is it is committed to asking and answering questions about how the technology of the original quantum accelerator would potentially work on its own terms rather than the original show's terms, while still fundamentally respecting Belisario's maxim, which is, if there is a thing that we don't know or can't grasp, it's because everyone in this room is still trying to put together technology that has been left in a bunker for 20 years. But when they do have an answer, it's because Ian is the smartest person in the room, or because somebody has had a transcendent epiphany about how this would potentially work in a way that helps them, allows them to apply present day technology to addressing that problem in a way that I thought was really cool. Like the fact that Ian is capable of communicating to themselves across timelines, that the key element that is required to potentially restore the accelerator is a cheat code in a video game because that's the only language that Ian would know. And they just kind of implement that immediately, seeing what it's supposed to do, not from the context of the original machine, but from their own machine, is actually really radical to me. And I like the idea that they're willing to push some of the boundaries of how it potentially works, because it introduces a new potential wrinkle in the future, which is, I'm not sure if we can just rest this spoiler here at this moment. The assumption of the end of the series is, now that Ben has accomplished the mission that had him leaping in the first place, he should potentially come back to the original timeline now. But we don't see it happen. But given everything that we've qualified about the way that he leapt, it means that he could go anywhere at this point. He can address points in time that the original assumption of the quantum accelerator could not. He could go in the future, and we could see all kind of weird stuff about the future that will also be very narratively riveting on a social message standpoint, because we could see all the ways that we've ruined the Earth, but also gives us the opportunity for him to engage in timelines that are closer to his own, which is also a stipulation of the original quantum accelerator, which would also be very interesting. And we've also set up that on some minor level, this can now be controlled from the headquarters, which means that even if we never get Ben back, we can deliberately put Ben anywhere we want for narrative purposes. And I'm kind of curious what that means, not only for potentially extending what some of the technobabble of the show can do, what other questions are there to ask about time travel when you are now in full control of it in both directions, but also fundamentally, what assumptions is the show prepared to make about the world in season 2? And are we prepared to ask and answer some of those questions about what the future of the US in 2030 will look like? Is that a thing that y'all want to know? Do y'all really want to hear what our writer's room thinks about the US in the year 2030? I probably don't, you know. Have you seen 2023?
It ain't great. So this raises the very serious question, because the ending of this is fairly ambiguous. It does not explicitly say, one way or another, whether or not Ben makes it back. Because at the end, the implication is, he's done his thing, so we must be getting him back now. But they don't show it. So the question now becomes, did they bring him back, or are we going to get into season 2 and find out he's also stuck? And are we getting some other narrative out of that?
Right. I am presuming that the idea is he's going to be still stuck for whatever reason, because that's the show, folks. Like, otherwise he has to have to be this other thing where like he's back, but then he's like, oh wait, I got another message from the future, and I got to do another secret mission, and like that would be dumb. To be quite honest. I don't want there to be a second secret mission from the future, because I one of the things with the arc plot that I wasn't crazy about in the end run, like once we see it all, is that a lot of the things of Janice being very explicitly antagonistic, like, ends up being just basically a red herring. And it's like, it ends up being more of a problem for them in the long run than less. For no reason. For other than because plot. And so I don't want there to be like a second secret mission, but I do like the idea that he's just like, well, he just didn't quite come back, and there's just more to do out there. And maybe they will tie that to just why Sam doesn't come back in the first place. Like that, like there's always going to be a new calling, a new mission, like somebody else still needs help, and you're always going to take that next call. And it could be as simple as that. But we also do see something is happening in the accelerator chamber at that very last moment when so what is it? And would it be as simple as Sam Beckett comes home, and does he come home because now Ben is out there, he can finally rest because somebody is out there doing the work?
Mm-hmm.
I hope that's the answer.
That'd be
because
very
then that
cool.
creates moral implications, because now you have a situation where in order to get somebody back, you have to put somebody else in, which risks
Right.
their lives because they have to go and do a bunch of stuff. But also means that if you ever want to get that person out, they have to continue to successfully make the changes, because the rule we have had, which they haven't broken yet, which is if you don't make the change, you don't save someone's life, you're stuck. That's it. And so does that mean that we've got the implication there could be other time travelers throughout history, right? So you could have people that have gone back in time and been stuck.
Yeah.
They've Captained America themselves without realizing that's what they've done, and then they just get stuck. Or are there time travelers who've died, and so therefore they can't come back because they have died in the body that they happen to be inhabiting? There are very interesting conversations that could be had there. And if they choose to do that, I would be curious to see that. Not least of all because I would get Scott Bakula again.
See Scott Bakula, but what would be a fascinating thing, since they do explicitly mention the evil leapers and all that, is if instead of it being Sam that comes back because of that, they have Aaliyah show up. I find that highly unlikely, just because Renee Coleman hasn't acted since like 1995. But I think that's a neat idea, and that's that would be,
That could be cool.
That could be cool.
I'm very
here we
intrigued. Go. Best headcanon. Turns out that Dean Stockwell has not been gone all of these years, and he just shows up, and it's the greatest thing ever. Biggest reveal. He just shows up, and he's like, hey, I'm Al. And everyone's like, what the fuck? We all thought you were gone.
No, this is what you do. You get it to be Al. It's Al who arrived, but you get the kid who played young Al in the mirror.
Yeah. Cause I was like, do you want a CGI Dean Stockwell? You don't.
No. Hold on. No, my headcanon was that actual Dean Stockwell
Is still
faked his
alive.
own death for this show. And then he's alive, and this is how he's revealed as being alive.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it would put butts in seats. I will say that.
Let's be real. If that fucking happened, if Dean Stockwell was in the episode, and then they went, by the way, he wasn't CG, or like, any of those trickeries, people would lose their fucking minds. There would be so many people watching this show.
They would lose their minds, but I highly suspect a great deal of that would also be, why on earth would you fake your death, guy? But that's
He's
a
dedicated
For a
to
thing
his
that
craft,
doesn't pay off
okay?
until season 2 of a show that might not get renewed.
Talk about dedication. You would give the guy a fucking Emmy.
That would be a lot.
You'd be like, wow, somebody has put on one hell of a fucking performance. Like, eat your heart out, Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh my god. So I will say these two things about the implications of the last season that I think are particularly interesting, just out of nowhere. One is more emotional and one is more, like, high energy action thingy, and I'll start with that one first, which is another version of Ben comes through the imaging chamber. That either a Ben from the future where the quantum accelerator, just before the quantum accelerator was destroyed, or, even more interestingly, a Ben from his past, so much further in his past that he couldn't have possibly known about the program, like in his early 20s or his teens, comes through the imaging chamber with a request or a mission. And everybody's like, why are you here? And how do you know about this? Which would be kind of interesting. But the one that is potentially more moving to me and less pacing of the show is Ben comes back. That's Ben. That Ben comes to the imaging chamber perfectly normally, goes home with Addison, they have a wonderful night, and then he just leaps while he's at the apartment. And then they discover, no, because of the big thingy that happened that that Leaper X attempted to do at the end of the episode, he's just kind of spiritually tied to the imaging chamber and can now be forced into a leap from wherever he physically is.
He comes back, but he's kind of unstable.
Consistent with what we see in this season a little bit.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. But, like, I feel like that would be even more emotional stakes because for Addison, that would be, we have done all of this work. You did all of this work to save me. I did all of this work to bring you back. And we both won. And now you're in my house, and I am prepared to tell you, let's get married. Let's close the deal immediately before anything else gets in the way. And then the machine gets in the way anyway. And now part of the tension is, when he's finished, he's gonna come back to the apartment just as normal. But now she will never be in control of whether he's physically there or not. And he's right there. I feel like that would be even more tense for her. That she will never know when this will ever be over. And when it seems like it is, they will be together and be able to touch and know what, like, be able for that relationship to potentially flourish the way they wanted it to. And the machine is still robbing her of it at the most inopportune moments when they could still potentially be together. And I think that would be a lot more dramatically interesting to me, because, like, a lot of that tension for the both of them is, are we in a relationship if we are not physically close? And I think that giving her more of that closeness and then taking it back from her will be a lot more tense than her just being robbed of it for several months. And I'm kind of curious to see what writing that would be like.
Curious.
That is intriguing. I mean, I can see them coming up with some other different threat from the future that needs to be addressed as a plot. Because, I mean, essentially what happens in the finale of this season, spoilers, blah, 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 is, you know, they, by defeating Martinez, and I do think it's interesting that Martinez is essentially defeated because of the connections Ben made in his previous sleep, specifically in the Old West one, because one of the people he dealt with back in the Old West sees him fighting with this guy. Immediately is just like, well, the guy that's fighting, whoever Ben had leapt into the first time, if he's fighting that guy, he's clearly the bad guy, and she just shoots him.
Yeah.
And which then neatly saves Ben and to maintain his pacifism as a concept. But at the same time, like, by doing that, and because in that timeline that Martinez came from, they had already destroyed the accelerator, we're left to presume that we are safe from that timeline happening at all and interfering, especially since he is from a future where Addison was the Leaper as opposed to Ben in the first place. So we're that closed that branch completely, and so nothing else will come from that branch. But some other branch might have. I mean, everything we saw about Martinez, who I think was not anywhere near adequately enough explored as a character. Because Martinez was shown to be a extraordinarily competent time travel agent who, for whatever reason, they had solved the memory loss aspect when he leaped, because he was fully briefed on what every one of his leaps was going to be. Because he had the same, because he also had the same thing, was like, you got to do 20 leaps to get to where you want to get specifically. But he seemed to know what each of those missions were going to be. He seemed to not have his own hologram guide, and he seemed to be fully briefed on the things he needed to know to do each leap. But also, he seemed to be, he also believed he was doing the right thing. Like, he was not an evil leaper. He was doing a mission that he truly believed was the right thing. And I think that could have been explored deeper. I mean, I would love to see what they do with it. If they could bring the character back, because Martinez pre-mission is still alive in 2023.
Yep.
There is a version of this as an extension that I'm actually very interested in, as no matter how this plays out for Ben and the rest of HQ, there's a version of Season 2 that I'm actually very intrigued by, because it's technically what Season 1 was supposed to be, up until we start liking Janice as a character, which is a political thriller. And I'm kind of intrigued, now that we've set up that there is a part of the timeline where the US government blames all of their poor decision making on time travel as opposed to just making good decisions. I'm kind of curious about, not even if this mightn't be season 2, but I'm kind of curious about a potential future season where the story is the Quantum Leap program is still funded by the government, but has to now conceal all of its actual work from its overseers because they suspect that someone higher up in political power is attempting to use time travel in an attempt to specifically, do all kinds of harmful shit to the timeline. Like, they send a leaper to win the Cuban Missile Crisis. They send somebody to successfully poison Putin or some kind of shit like that. And the rest of them are like, this is not our job. This is not what we're here to do. So we need to find out who's responsible for that, because we're seeing the negative consequences of their timeline actually affect America's history in very drastic ways. And the only way that Ziggy is telling you to resolve those issues is by solving those minor personal problems again. And you're like, I don't know how this is supposed to help us resolve these issues. And then you come back and you see how that happens. How the Overton window of our socio-political landscape is shifted by making minor positive changes in the lives of civilians. And that's the story. How do you balance the political intrigue of what's happening in the headquarters with the actual work that the Leap is doing in ways that are interesting and dramatic, and ask complicated questions about how political engagement with the actual groundwork that helps people's lives be better actually makes things more complicated. But I require them to write good political intrigue, and we see what happened to Janice. So...
Well, I mean, I think part of the problem with Janice, in Janice being a red herring, is she's working with Ben, and at the end of the day, Ben does have to be a good guy who's doing a good thing. And he chose to work with Janice to pull that off because I mean, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. He does that because Ian tells him to do it from the future. Why does Ian tell him to do that from the future? Because you can't trust Ziggy. But, like, it feels like information is withheld for the sake of withholding it rather than necessarily for good plot reasons. And thus, Janice has to be doing these sort of weird Black Ops things for several episodes just to maintain the mystery. But at the same time, we have to have what she's doing has to be in tune with what Ben's doing. What Ben's doing has to fundamentally be a good thing, or else he's not the hero of the story.
Because, like, part of the problem with how Janice is resolved for me is Janice is written in the first few episodes to have a very good reason to not trust anybody. Not even outside of what she knows about Ben's mission. She's obviously revealed herself as a character to be a person struggling with developing trust in other people. And then everybody just kind of learns that everybody's on the same side and just kind of gets along.
Yeah.
And it would be far more interesting to write a version of Janice that is like, okay, I agree that we are all on the same page right now, but that didn't help me before. So when this is done, I'm going to go back to not trusting anybody. Because, like, it just feels too neat otherwise. And I guess I would have liked a relationship that they would have had with Janice afterwards, where they all acknowledge that they all want the same things. But the difference is that Janice is not sure who wants it for the right reasons, or who is actually genuinely concerned about her well-being, or the well-being of others, instead of just the well-being of the program.
Yeah. So, okay, I have one last thing to say, because we're over an hour. We gotta, like, not do a 5-hour podcast about an 18-episode season.
I mean, we can, just not tonight.
I mean, we've not even done, like, an episode-by-episode breakdown.
I mean, good lord. We'd be at this till next month.
We would be at this for a while if we did that.
Maybe we need to, like, have this just a Quantum Leap show. But the one thing I want to note here is I have no idea what season 2 is going to be, but there are a lot of little hints in this season of possibilities. So, for example, Ian does wonder in one episode whether or not decisions they've made might have affected the outcomes they're now dealing with right now. But later on, Ian says in the future, but they blamed us for things that Ian just claims can't possibly be true. Like, it's all nonsense. They were just looking for a scapegoat. The thing is, we don't know anything about future Ian, other than we assume future Ian is the same morally and ethically as present and past Ian. But it is entirely possible that they are, in fact, fucking up the future by doing what they're doing, because they are doing the time travel stuff, which has wide-reaching implications, as is warned throughout both this season and the previous show, that when you change things in the past, there can be effects. Now, we're told little things like, if you just, like, change, like, a small thing, it doesn't really have a big effect. I'm okay, sure, if you want me to believe that, but we don't know what the consequences of this program, as currently structured in this show, could be for a hypothetical future 10, 20, 30 years ahead. And so it's entirely possible maybe the government's right. They have screwed it up. Not on purpose, but they have made things worse.
I mean, given how when Ben didn't even remember what he had done, why he had done things, and Janice was acting very black hat, they were asking the questions like, do we know that Ben is trying to do a good thing? Like, we're here helping him, but can we trust Ben? Like, that's a recurring question. And I think the question that never gets asked once Ben's like, wait, my mission is to save Addison, and they realize that, like, it came from future Ian, they never question, is this good data that drove Ben and Janice to do what they did? Were they being deliberately misled for some reason? And if so, why? Like, that didn't even get brought up. You would think Jen, of all people, would be like, hey, can we? I mean, they do have Ian for the next episode just sort of having this sort of moral crisis of like, why would I do that in the future? And then comes to, it takes him a long time, too long, I think, to get to the answer of, wait, I'm a good person. I surely had a good reason. And then,
but here's the thing. your experiences throughout this, right? We see how experiences affect people, right? Characters have that happen to them repeatedly. So you have no idea who you could be in 20, 30 years with sufficient amounts of traumatic experience. And I mean, for heaven's sakes, future Ian is in a dystopia where like nuclear winter has come to Los Angeles.
I mean, it's a throwaway line where he's just like, I was lucky to find a person for you to leap into. Which implies there's just this random survivor that Ian shoved in a closet and just said, wait there. Just wait.
Yeah, there's big questions that like the series, I think, is hiding. And I don't know if they're going to deal with it. I think it would be interesting if they did, though.
I think it would be interesting, but I think it was a little too... There was something a little too hand-wavy of like, of course, future Ian is good, and we should not question this data.
There is another more complicated version of this question as well, which is, what if all of the assumptions that everybody has made up to this point is perfectly correct for this moment, but they have not considered that the secondary effects of those decisions are terrible for other people in ways that snowball into this disaster? And that the messes that they have to clean up in future leaps are the secondary consequences that their decisions in one body has had for someone that they have not met elsewhere. Like, what if leaping into that one body and saving that kid in the earthquake ensured that someone else died who, if they had lived, would have solved a problem 20 or 30 years from now, that now they don't get to solve and now becomes a problem that we have to deal with? Does that mean that we should have let
because
that kid
he didn't die? Some other kid didn't get his kidney, and therefore that kid died, and therefore, like, yeah, you could definitely play that game.
Yeah,
but I mean, given that how like the characters don't seem to understand the consequences of like, hey, there's this other time traveler out there. We found out who the guy is and went to his house, and he doesn't know what we're talking about. Clearly, he's lying, rather than maybe he hasn't time traveled yet because it's time travel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It took them too long to get from that A to B.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you know what killed me about that episode in the first place? They spend a lot of humming and hawing about, should we be overt about the fact that we're talking about a time travel program? Because if he doesn't know, we just taught him about a time travel program. It's like, maybe just don't talk to the guy. Maybe just keep observing him.
Yeah.
Maybe that would have resolved your issue.
Yeah, very possible. Okay, well we gotta start our process.
We
of
could
winding
keep going
down.
forever, but
oh
we
yeah,
probably
there's so
shouldn't.
many questions. Yeah. So Marshall, as our special guest, where can folks find you and your things? And feel free to plug book objects if you would like to let people know that you have book things that they can read.
I have many book things. I am the author of the Meridian Saga, primarily, which is 17 books and climbing.
Holy crap.
Which consists of mostly 4 different series that are all set within the same magical city, and all the storylines intertwine. And I also am the author of The Velocity of Revolution, which is a diesel punk fantasy with motorcycles and tacos and magic mushrooms that make people have psychic connections. And you can find me, my website is mrmaresca.com. I am on Twitter as @MarshallMaresca for as long as Twitter has not burned down to the ground. And you can also find me on my podcast, which is World Building for Masochists, where I am joined by Rowena Miller and Cass Morris, where we talk about all things world building to excessive degrees, because we want to hurt ourselves by doing more than we should. But the important thing is that we are the ones who are masochists, not our readers. So we take the pain so you don't have to.
Well, thanks very much, Marshall. This has been great. I mean, it's not like it's hard to get, like, if we just said, hey, we're doing Quantum Leap, you would just be like, okay.
I would be here. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
You want to do the episode by episode of either old series or new series? I am here for it.
I am glad to know because, I have many personal feelings rooted in watching Quantum Leap with my grandma. So, for folks at home, thanks very much for listening. Again, go over to skiffingfanny.com/listener suggestions if you want to let us know what you thought about this. You have thoughts about the new Quantum Leap show, please hit us up with that. You can find us on all the social media sites, or most of them, basically, but mostly like Mastodon, Insta, all those kinds of places. We're at Skiffy and Fanty on pretty much all those things. Go to our Linktree/Skiffy and Fanty for that. You can get our newsletter at skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. And if you like what we do, we have a Patreon at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. And we also will take payment in 5-star reviews on iTunes, podcatchers of all sorts and varieties. And if you don't do that, I'll cry at night. There you go. Me, I'm at SeanDuke.net. Alphabet streams on Twitch Tuesdays, Thursdays at 7 Central. I'm at patreon.com/thejoyfactory. I am Sean Duke and various other things, but I have a Linktree/Sean Duke for you to find all my socials. And go to SeanDuke.net/thehistories if you want weird encyclopedia entries about people.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at The Rising Tides, my newsletter at brandanobrien.xyz, and at speculatorsf.com.
So I will just note, since I have to make these all awkward as required by the Skiffy and Fanny bylaws.
You don't have to.
Nope, we made the bylaws that they're required. We have a
That's
union.
the nature of
everything.
bylaws.
Yeah, it's huge. I'm very much planning to begin a Quantum Leap program for me to directly leap into specific U.S. presidents. I'm going to start with Taft, because I've heard he's the most boring. And I would like to make him more interesting. So I'm going to start there.
Maybe we don't need American presidents to be interesting. You know what happens to interesting American presidents?
Well, I mean, if he's a good if I make him good.
Lincoln was both interesting and good.
Same with JFK.
Oh. Why do you have to do that, Brandon? Like, this is supposed to be awkward and weird. I was gonna, like, talk about having polka dot parties, and he was gonna ride a giraffe, and you were just like, nah, like, he's gonna get assassinated now. Like, this is just depressing now.
I made it awkward this time.
Yeah, I guess, like, awkward ending. And scene. If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.